The black emptiness of space stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by the menacing sight of the Vorthok war fleet. Their ships looked like giant metal beasts floating in the darkness, each one painted blood red and crackling with deadly energy. The alien vessels moved with purpose, arranging themselves in a formation that every military officer would recognize as preparation for total destruction. Admiral Jake Morrison pressed his face closer to the thick glass of the observation deck, aboard the human diplomatic ship Harmony. He had seen many alien fleets during his 30 years of service, but nothing quite like this. The Vorthok ships were massive, each one easily 3 times the size of the largest human battleship. Strange symbols glowed along their hulls, pulsing like heartbeats in the void. The communication system crackled to life, filling the bridge with static before clearing into an alien voice that sounded like gravel being crushed in a metal tube. The translator worked overtime to convert the harsh alien language into something humans could understand. Admiral Morrison of the human vessel, the voice began, each word dripping with contempt. I am Fleet Commander Thakmer of the Vorthok Empire. You float before the might of our war fleet. Look upon our ships and know that resistance is futile. Jake straightened his blue uniform and ran a hand through his graying hair. At 55, he had dealt with plenty of alien species who thought they could intimidate humanity. Some were reasonable. Others, like the Vorthok, seemed to believe that bigger ships meant automatic victory. I see your ships, Commander, Jake replied calmly into the comm unit. Very impressive. Is there something you wanted to discuss? A sound that might have been laughter echoed through the speakers. Discuss. Human. We do not discuss. We command. Your species has spread too far into space. Your colonies on the rim worlds must be abandoned immediately. You will withdraw all human presence from the outer systems within 1 standard cycle. Jake glanced at his tactical officer, Lieutenant Blake Thompson, who was monitoring the alien fleet's weapon systems. Blake shook his head slightly, indicating that while the Vorthok ships were heavily armed, they hadn't powered up their main weapons yet. This was still just a show of force. That's quite a demand, Commander, Jake said, keeping his voice level. Those colonies house millions of people, families who have lived there for generations. I'm afraid we can't simply abandon them. The silence that followed stretched for nearly a full minute. Jake could imagine the alien commander consulting with his officers, perhaps surprised that the humans weren't immediately cowering in fear. Most species the Vorthok encountered probably surrendered at the first sight of their fleet. When the voice returned, it carried a new edge of menace. Then you have chosen annihilation. Witness the fate that awaits all who defy the Vorthok Empire. Through the viewport, Jake watched as the alien ships began to move. They formed a perfect circle around what appeared to be their command vessel, a ship so large it could have housed a small city. Warning lights began flashing along its hull, and Jake could see massive bay doors beginning to open along its underside. Deep within the Vorthok flagship, something was stirring. Emergency lighting bathed the launch bay in an eerie red glow that leaked out into space. Jake could hear new sounds coming through the comm system now, mechanical hissing, the groan of heavy machinery, and underneath it all, something that sounded almost like breathing. Containment protocols disengaged, came a different alien voice, speaking in their own language before the translator caught up. All personnel clear the launch bay, preparing to release the Devourer. Jake felt his crew tense around him. Even without knowing exactly what the Devourer was, the name itself carried weight. Lieutenant Thompson's scanner readings spiked as something massive began moving within the alien ship. Sir, Thompson whispered, I'm reading biosignatures, unlike anything in our database. Whatever they're releasing, it's alive, and it's huge. The bay doors of the Vorthok flagship opened fully, revealing a darkness so complete it seemed to absorb the stars around it. Then something moved in that darkness. Something that made Jake's trained military mind struggle to process what he was seeing. The creature that emerged was like nothing in human nightmares. 30 meters of pure predator. Its hide was scarred and battle-worn, marked by countless victories against other species. Multiple eyes burned with an ancient hunger that seemed to reach across space itself. This thing had destroyed worlds, consumed entire civilizations, and now it was heading straight for the Harmony. Jake watched the bioengineered monster launch itself toward his ship with impossible grace for something so massive. Its claws extended, ready to tear through their hull like paper. The Vorthok had unleashed their ultimate weapon, their final answer to any species that dared resist their empire, and Jake Morrison, veteran of 100 diplomatic missions, looked at this approaching nightmare and did something completely unexpected. He chuckled softly under his breath. The massive creature slammed into the Harmony with the force of a falling mountain. The entire ship groaned and twisted as 30 meters of bioengineered death wrapped itself around their hull like a giant spider claiming its prey. Jake felt the deck plates vibrate beneath his feet as the monster's claws found grip points along the reinforced outer plating. The sound was unlike anything the human crew had ever heard. Metal designed to survive direct hits from space debris began to shriek and tear like wet paper. Emergency alarms blared throughout the ship as red warning lights bathed every corridor in an ominous glow. The Harmony had been built to withstand the worst that space could throw at it. But this creature was something else entirely. Captain Rachel Davis burst onto the bridge, her face pale but determined. She had commanded the Harmony for 8 years, and had never lost a ship or crew member under her watch. She wasn't about to start now, even if they were facing something that defied all logic and reason. "Admiral," she called out over the sound of screaming metal, "we've got multiple hull breaches starting on decks 4 through 7. The creature is tearing through our armor plating like it's made of cardboard. At this rate, we have maybe 8 minutes before it reaches our life support systems." Jake nodded calmly, as if they were discussing the weather instead of their impending doom. He walked to the communication console and pressed the activation button with steady fingers. Around him, his crew worked frantically to seal emergency bulkheads and reroute power to the most critical systems. "Put me through to the Vorthok, Commander," Jake said to the communications officer. Lieutenant Ben Foster looked at his admiral like he had lost his mind. "Sir, with respect, shouldn't we be preparing escape pods or trying to fight this thing off?" "Just make the connection, Lieutenant." The main screen flickered to life, showing the grotesque face of Fleet Commander Thakmar. The alien's features were a nightmare blend of insect and reptile, with compound eyes that reflected the bridge lights like broken mirrors. His mandibles clicked together in what the crew could only assume was the Vorthok equivalent of a satisfied smile. "So, human," the commander said, his translated voice dripping with mockery, "are you ready to surrender? Your pathetic vessel will be torn apart in moments. Perhaps if you beg convincingly, I will allow your crew to die quickly." Jake straightened his uniform tie and smiled politely, as if he were attending a dinner party instead of facing certain death. "Actually, Commander, I'd like to make a request under standard diplomatic protocols." The alien's compound eyes blinked in what appeared to be confusion. Several other Vorthok faces appeared at the edges of the screen, all looking equally puzzled by this unexpected response. "A request? Your ship is being devoured by our ultimate weapon, and you want to make a request?" "That's correct," Jake replied, pleasantly. "I'd like permission to board your flagship. Specifically, I need access to your agricultural facilities." The bridge of the Harmony fell silent, except for the ongoing sounds of destruction from outside. Even the emergency alarm seemed too quiet, as Jake's crew stared at him in complete bewilderment. Captain Davis opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, apparently at a loss for words. Commander Thakmar's mandibles stopped clicking. His compound eyes focused on Jake with the intensity of a predator trying to understand unexpected prey behavior. "You want to visit our agricultural bay while your ship is being destroyed?" Standard diplomatic courtesy, Jake explained, as casually as if he were asking for directions to the nearest restaurant. I need to prepare something for our mutual friend out there. It won't take long. The alien commander consulted with his officers in rapid untranslated speech that sounded like gravel being shaken in a metal can. Jake waited patiently, his hands clasped behind his back, while behind him his crew exchanged worried glances. Very well, human, the commander finally said. Your strange request is granted. Perhaps, before you die, you will provide us with some entertainment. 20 minutes later, Jake found himself standing in the most advanced agricultural facility he had ever seen. The Vorthok hydroponic gardens stretched for hundreds of meters in all directions, filled with plants and growing systems that represented technology centuries ahead of human capabilities. Automated systems tended to crops that glowed with their own inner light, while protein synthesis machines hummed quietly in climate-controlled chambers. Jake walked through the facility with the confident stride of someone who had spent years working with similar equipment, though on a much smaller scale. He examined the protein synthesizers with the practiced eye of a man who had grown up on a farm before joining the diplomatic corps. His grandfather would have been amazed by the efficiency of these systems, even if the technology was completely alien. The Vorthok technicians watched him nervously as he began making adjustments to their equipment, programming new molecular patterns into their synthesis matrices. They had expected the human to beg for mercy, or perhaps try to sabotage their systems. Instead, he worked with the focused concentration of someone following a recipe he had used many times before. Within minutes, Jake had produced several handfuls of what looked like ordinary food pellets. He examined them carefully, testing their consistency and smell, before nodding with satisfaction. To the watching aliens, it looked like the human had simply wasted precious time making snacks while his ship was being torn apart. But Jake Morrison knew exactly what he was doing, and he was pretty sure this was going to work. Jake stepped back aboard the Harmony, carrying nothing more than a simple metal container about the size of a lunchbox. The scene that greeted him was like something from a disaster movie. Emergency lights cast everything in a hellish red glow, and the constant sound of tearing metal filled the air like a symphony of destruction. The creature had been busy during his absence. Where once there had been solid hull plating, now gaped a hole large enough for a small shuttle to fly through. The edges of the breach glowed white-hot from the creature's claws, and atmosphere continued to leak out invisible streams that quickly froze in the vacuum of space. The devourer clung to the outside of the ship like some nightmarish parasite, its massive bulk completely covering what had once been the port observation deck. Captain Rachel Davis rushed to meet him, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. Behind her, the bridge crew worked frantically at their stations, trying to maintain life, support and structural integrity, while their ship was literally being eaten alive around them. Admiral Morrison, she said, her voice tight with the kind of stress that comes from watching your command fall apart piece by piece. With all due respect, what in the hell are you planning to do with whatever's in that box? That thing out there has torn through 3 decks of reinforced armor plating. Our weapons can't even scratch it, and in about 5 minutes, it's going to reach the reactor core. Jake opened the container and showed her the contents. Inside were what looked like ordinary food pellets, the kind you might feed to livestock back on Earth. They were brown and unremarkable, roughly the size of golf balls, and they smelled faintly of something that reminded Rachel of her grandmother's kitchen. Trust me, Captain, Jake said with a calm smile that seemed completely out of place given their situation. I grew up on a cattle ranch in Montana before I joined the diplomatic service. My family raised everything from horses to prize bulls. I've dealt with plenty of aggressive animals that everyone else thought were impossible to handle. Rachel stared at him as if he had completely lost his mind. Around them, the ship shuddered again as the creature shifted its position, searching for new areas to tear apart. Sir, that thing is not a cow. It's a bioengineered weapon that's destroyed entire civilizations. You can't just walk up to it and offer it a snack. Actually, Jake said, sealing up the container and heading toward the equipment lockers. That's exactly what I'm going to do. But first, I need to borrow one of our EVA suits. The environmental suits aboard the Harmony were state-of-the-art, equipment designed for extended work in the vacuum of space. Jake selected one from the emergency locker and began the familiar process of suiting up. He had done this hundreds of times during his years of service, though never under quite these circumstances. As he sealed the helmet and ran through the pre-breathing checklist, he could hear his crew talking in worried whispers behind him. Lieutenant Ben Foster was trying to convince Captain Davis to stop him, arguing that sending their commanding officer out to face the creature was tantamount to suicide. Others were suggesting they should try to ram the alien flagship or detonate their own reactor to take the monster with them. Jake ignored all of it. He had made up his mind, and he was pretty sure he knew what he was dealing with. The evidence had been right there in the Vorthok agricultural systems. Once you knew what to look for, the airlocks cycled open with a soft hiss, revealing the star-filled darkness of space. Jake activated his suit's maneuvering thrusters and pushed off gently from the airlock threshold. Behind him, the familiar bulk of the Harmony looked like a toy that some giant child had broken and partially devoured. Throughout the Vorthok fleet, bridge crews watched in stunned silence as the human ambassador jetted slowly away from his dying ship. Their sensors tracked his movement as he adjusted his trajectory, heading not toward their vessels in some desperate escape attempt, but directly toward the Devourer itself. "What is the human doing?" Commander Thakmer demanded from his flagship. "Bridge, have his fear chemicals driven him to madness?" Jake's approach was steady and deliberate, like a man taking a casual stroll through his backyard. The creature sensed him coming long before he was visible to its dozen burning eyes. Its massive head turned away from the hull breach it had been working on, focusing instead on this tiny figure approaching through the void. The Devourer was even more terrifying, up close than it had appeared from a distance. Its hide was covered in scars from countless battles, each mark telling the story of some world that had fallen to its hunger. Claws longer than Jake's entire body extended from limbs that could crush a building. Its mouth opened slowly, revealing rows upon rows of teeth, designed to tear through the strongest materials known to science. The sound it made was like nothing Jake had ever heard. It echoed through the cum channels and vibrated through his suit, a roar that spoke of ancient hunger and countless victories. This was the sound that entire species had heard in their final moments. The last thing they experienced before being consumed by the Vorthok Empire's ultimate weapon. Jake came to a stop about 10 meters away from the creature and reached into his container. He pulled out a handful of the brown pellets he had prepared in the Vorthok agricultural bay, then did something that would have seemed insane to anyone watching. He made a soft clicking sound with his tongue, the kind of noise farmers used to call their animals back home. Then he extended his hand toward the nightmare creature, offering it the treats like he was feeding sugar cubes to a horse. "Easy there, big fella," he said gently, his voice carrying through the comm system to every ship in the fleet. "I know what you really are, and you've been hurt enough." The roar that had been building in the creature's throat suddenly stopped, cut off as if someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear his own heartbeat echoing inside his helmet. The massive beast froze in place, its dozen glowing eyes fixed on the small offering in the human's outstretched hand. Something had changed. Jake could see it in the way the creature's posture shifted, the way its sensory organs began twitching and moving with sudden interest. Whatever the Devourer was detecting in those simple food pellets, it was triggering something deep within its bioengineered brain. The treats Jake had prepared contained more than just basic nutrition. Using the Vorthok's own agricultural systems, he had synthesized proteins with very specific chemical signatures. molecules that matched patterns he had found buried in their historical databases. These weren't random compounds, but carefully crafted replicas of foods that had once been common on worlds that no longer existed. The creature's massive head tilted to one side, like a dog hearing a familiar sound. Its nostrils flared as it processed the scent molecules drifting from Jake's offering. Somewhere in its genetically modified memory, ancient pathways were activating, connections that had been dormant for millions of years. Jake continued making the soft clicking sounds with his tongue, a technique his grandfather had taught him for calming spooked horses. The rhythm was important, slow and steady, the kind of sound that spoke of safety and comfort rather than threat or aggression. "That's right," he said gently, his voice barely above a whisper. "You remember these, don't you, from before they hurt you and changed you into something you were never meant to be?" The transformation in the creature was remarkable to witness. The aggressive tension that had made it seem like a coiled spring ready to strike began melting away, like ice under warm sunlight. Its claws retracted slightly, no longer extended for maximum damage. The ridge of spines along its back lowered, and the bioluminescent patches along its hide shifted from the angry red of a hunting predator to a softer, more neutral blue-green. The devourer moved closer, each step careful and deliberate. Despite its enormous size, it moved with surprising grace, like a cat approaching something interesting but potentially dangerous. Its massive claws found purchase on Jake's environmental suit, but instead of crushing or tearing, they held him. With the gentleness of a parent lifting a child, Jake felt no fear, even with those deadly talons just inches from his body. He had spent enough time around large animals to recognize the difference between aggressive contact and curious investigation. This creature was not trying to hurt him, it was trying to understand him. The beast lowered its great head until it was level with Jake's helmet. Up close, he could see that its eyes were not the solid burning orbs they appeared to be from a distance. They were complex, multifaceted organs capable of seeing across multiple spectrums of light. Right now, they were focused on him with an intelligence that was startling in its depth. When the creature finally reached out to take the treat from his hand, its movements were surprisingly delicate. Jake had expected it to snatch the food, pell it with the same violent hunger it had shown while tearing apart his ship. Instead, it carefully lifted the offering from his palm with the tip of one claw, holding it as gently as a person might hold a soap bubble. The moment the treat touched the creature's tongue, something extraordinary happened. Its entire body seemed to shiver, not with cold or fear, but with something that looked almost like relief. The food contained chemical markers that its altered genetics recognized as safe, familiar, and comforting. These were the molecular signatures of home, of a time before warfare and weaponization. "Good boy," Jake murmured, slowly reaching out to touch the creature's armored hide. He expected the surface to be cold and metallic, but instead found it was warm and almost leather-like in texture. The scars that covered its body told stories of pain and violence, but underneath Jake could feel the steady rhythm of a massive heart beating. The devourer leaned into Jake's touch like a horse seeking comfort from a trusted handler. The sound that rumbled up from deep within its chest was nothing like the terrifying roar that had echoed across space just minutes before. This was something altogether different, a deep, thrumming vibration that spoke of contentment and gratitude. Throughout the Vorthog fleet, bridge crews stared at their displays in complete shock. Their instruments showed impossible readings. Their ultimate weapon, the creature that had destroyed countless worlds and struck fear into entire civilizations, was behaving like an oversized pet seeking attention from its owner. Commander Thakmer stood frozen at his command station, his compound eyes reflecting the light from dozens of monitoring screens. Every tactical display, every sensor reading, every piece of data his ship was collecting told the same unbelievable story. The human was not fighting their weapon. He was not trying to escape from it or destroy it. He was petting it. "This is impossible," the commander whispered in his own language, momentarily forgetting that his translators were still active. "The devourer does not show mercy. It does not display affection. It consumes. It destroys. That is its nature." But the evidence was right there in front of him, being broadcast across every communication channel in the fleet. The creature that had been their most feared weapon was now nuzzling against the human ambassador like a dog greeting its favorite person. The sight was so completely contrary to everything the Vorthok knew about their bioweapon that several bridge officers began checking their sensors for malfunctions. Jake continued stroking the creature's hide, feeling the tension flow out of its massive frame with each gentle touch. This was not the monster the Vorthok had shown him. This was something else entirely. Something that had been hidden beneath layers of conditioning and genetic manipulation. And Jake was pretty sure he knew exactly what it really was. Jake activated his suit's communication system, broadcasting on all frequencies so that every ship in the Vorthok fleet could hear his words. The massive creature beside him had settled into a comfortable position, wrapping itself around the damaged hull of the Harmony like an enormous cat curling up next to its favorite person. One of its great claws continued to rest gently on Jake's shoulder, not as a threat, but as a gesture of trust and companionship. "I suppose you're all wondering what just happened here," Jake began, his voice carrying the calm confidence of someone who had just solved a puzzle that had been bothering him for years. "The creature you call the Devourer, this weapon you've used to terrorize entire civilizations, was never supposed to be a weapon at all." He reached into his container and offered another treat to the massive beast, which accepted it with the same gentle care it had shown before. The sound rumbling from its chest had grown even louder now, a deep purring that vibrated through Jake's suit and could probably be felt throughout both ships. About 15 years ago, human archaeological teams discovered extensive ruins on Kepler-4 for 2b, Jake continued, scratching behind one of the creature's massive ear-like appendages. The civilization there had been dead for over 3 million years, but they left behind detailed records of their society. They were farmers, you see, peaceful people who had learned to work with nature instead of trying to dominate it. The Devourer shifted slightly, pressing more of its weight against the human ship's hull. If the Harmony had been in better condition, the additional pressure might have been concerning. As things stood, the creature seemed to be actually helping to seal some of the smaller breaches it had created earlier. "These ancient people had a problem," Jake said, pulling up holographic displays from his suit's computer system. Their worlds were rich and fertile, perfect for growing food, but they were also home to some very dangerous predators. Wild creatures that could destroy entire harvests overnight, kill livestock, threaten families. The displays showed artistic reconstructions based on the archaeological findings. Beautiful worlds covered in vast farms and peaceful cities, but shadowed by the constant threat of massive predatory beasts that hunted in packs and showed no fear of the farmers who lived there. So they did what humans might do in a similar situation. They took the DNA of the worst predators on their worlds and they redesigned it. But they didn't create a weapon. Jake's voice grew warmer as he continued petting the creature. They created the perfect guardian, big enough and strong enough to fight off any threat, smart enough to tell friend from enemy, and gentle enough to live alongside families with small children. Commander Thakmer's voice crackled over the communication system, filled with disbelief and growing anger. "You lie, human. The Devourer is a weapon of pure destruction. It knows only hunger and violence." "That's what you turned it into," Jake replied, and for the first time, his voice carried a sharp edge of anger. "Look at these scars covering its body. Look at the way it flinches when loud noises come from your ships. This poor creature has been tortured for millennia, conditioned through pain and starvation to associate every living thing with either threat or food." The creature seemed to sense the tension in Jake's voice and nuzzled against him more firmly, as if offering comfort. Jake patted its massive head reassuringly, his anger fading back into the gentle tone he had been using. The archaeological records showed dozens of these creatures living on each farm world. They were companions and protectors. Children rode on their backs. Families would gather around them during cold nights for warmth. They were bred to be loyal, intelligent, and above all else, protective of those they considered family. Jake gestured toward the Vorthok fleet, his movement causing the creature to lift its head and look in the same direction. Its multiple eyes tracked the alien ships with obvious wariness, but it made no aggressive moves. But somewhere along the way, your empire found one of these creatures. Maybe it was the last survivor of a dead world. Maybe it was injured and alone. Instead of caring for it, you saw only a weapon to be exploited. You starved it until it would do anything for food. You hurt it until it associated every new species with pain. You turned one of the gentlest creatures in the galaxy into an instrument of terror, the communication channels filled with angry chittering from various Vorthok commanders. But Jake ignored them and continued speaking directly to Fleet Commander Thok. So here's what's going to happen, Commander. You're going to order your ships to stand down immediately. You're going to withdraw from all human territory and cease your expansion into sectors occupied by peaceful species. And you're going to submit to rehabilitation protocols overseen by the Galactic Council. And why? The alien commander snarled. Would we agree to such terms? You have no leverage, human. Your ship is crippled. Your crew, helpless. Jake smiled and offered another treat to the massive creature beside him. The Devourer's purring grew even louder, and Jake could swear he detected a note of happiness in the sound. Because if you don't, Jake said pleasantly, you're going to discover something far more dangerous than any bioengineered predator. You're going to face a species that gets genuinely upset when someone hurts innocent animals. And Commander, we humans have some very creative ideas about justice. He paused to let that sink in, then added with a grin that could be heard in his voice, plus, I've got about 12 billion more people back home who are going to be very interested to hear about how you've been treating this magnificent creature. Trust me, you don't want to make that many humans angry at once. The creature seemed to sense Jake's mood and made a sound that was unmistakably happy, a gentle warbling noise that spoke of contentment and trust. For the first time in millennia, the Devourer was exactly what it had been designed to be, a loyal companion enjoying the simple pleasure of being treated with kindness. And throughout the Vorthok fleet, commanders began to realize they might have seriously underestimated what humanity was capable of when properly motivated.